So you think you know everything there is to prepare for a trip? Let's find out, shall we? In this video, I'm going to give you a bunch of the things that I think about depending on the trip I'm going on. Is it a one-day trip with a bunch of mates in my local four-wheel drive park, or am I going for an extended trip? Let's unpack it and let's help you get out there and have a really positive off-road adventure. Do you have the right vehicle for the trip? Now obviously we can't all afford a variety of different four-wheel drives, but if you're planning on doing a really long distance touring trip and going on those sort of adventures, my 200 series with the camper on the back is absolutely perfect for that. Maybe something like one of these expedition trucks is going to suit your need. You can take everything, including the kitchen sink, and tow a massive trailer. Will it suit your needs? Or something like my 105 series here, twin locked, crawler gears in the transfer case. You can live out of it quite comfortably, but it does some really cool hardcore four-wheel driving. So at the end of the day, is the vehicle you're driving or taking on the trip going to suit the trip? Do you have sufficient expertise to do the trip? And this could be not only to lead the trip, to fix any vehicles that might have issues, or to manage those situations, to deal with any vehicle recoveries that might be required. It might be you, it might be someone else on the trip, it might be a combination of people, but is there sufficient expertise on the trip to deal with any issues that may arise? You want to think about how long the trip is. Is it a short 4-hour trip? Is it a 4-month trip? What are you going to be doing on the trip? Is it easy four-wheel driving all the way? Is it really hard, difficult four-wheel driving? All of these factors are going to be considerations as to how you prepare your vehicle. The next thing is, who's on the trip? Are there 30 people going on the trip in 30 four-wheel drives and half of them have never done a four-wheel drive trip before? Or is there 3 mates and you're all really competent four-wheel drivers driving similar vehicles? All of these factors are going to have a bearing on how you prepare and plan for the trip. What sort of accommodation requirements do you have? Are you camping? Are you towing a caravan? What sort of clothing do you need on the trip? I tell you, one thing I've learned is you always, every single trip, need to make sure that you have some warm clothing. I always keep a jacket like this stashed away in the vehicle somewhere for exactly that situation. There was a time we were on a summer trip. It was glorious, 30 degrees. I think that's about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 30-degree days. It was glorious weather. We started to see a cold front coming in and I got a bit concerned. The next day we had a foot of snow down in the Victorian high country, and am I glad I had really good warm clothing and good accommodation for my family and myself. You want to ask yourself, what's the access to the area that you want to go into? Do you need a permit or a pass to access that region? Here's a desert park pass from the Simpson Desert when Mrs. Mad Matt and I went there in 2022. It comes with a handbook, which was really helpful and good reading. And this is a map of Central Australia. When we travelled through that area, I was able to reference the paper map and plan out our route. Here's a Victorian high country, a mountainous area here in Australia, and it's all the maps and areas that you want to go and see. So make sure you've got the passes and permits to go to the area and get the maps and resources that will help you out. The next consideration is, can you go to that place at the time of year that you want to? You don't want to go to a desert in the middle of summer, and you may want to go to the mountains instead. But then the mountains in winter time can be full of snow. Now that may work where you are or it may not. So all of these things are important considerations when you're planning your trip. Now when you're going to a coastal area, it is really important to know what the tides are doing so that you can make sure you're travelling through that region at an appropriate tide. The next thing, if we talk about our mapping, obviously I love paper maps. I don't reckon there's much better way to plan a trip than having your paper maps spread out on the dining room table. Let me know in the comments below if you agree with that. But let's face it, when we're driving, we're all going to use some sort of device that has the mapping software on it. Now I use my phone, believe it or not, and I have a mapping software called Memory Maps. It's an app, but I can purchase all of the topographical maps and so on that I want to use when I'm traveling on the road. So that's my electronic version, but I also always have paper versions of areas that I don't necessarily know. So with your electronics, there's lots and lots of different ways to achieve the end result. Be really familiar with the electronic devices, but don't rely on them, because if something goes wrong with that, good old paper, it's pretty hard to beat. Let's talk about fatigue management. Now, unless you're one of those very rare people that never has to sleep, we all get tired and we all have stresses and so on in our life. And when it comes to the weekend or the big trip and we're about to head off, we all want to get into it. So let's get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and drive for 12 hours, and we will only stop for lunch for 10 minutes. You know as well as I know, that's not smart. Okay, especially if you've got your family in the car. And one of the considerations around fatigue management that I like to just say to people and put that perspective out there is, you're dead if you have an accident. You leave behind the family who has to carry the hurt and the pain. And I'm one of those people. My brother died because he was drink driving and he wasn't wearing his seatbelt. And we as a family carry the pain of his loss. So always give really due consideration to the fatigue management on your trip. Depending on the trip, you're going to need different tools. Now, being a motor mechanic, I pretty much can't go on any trip, even a day trip, without my tool roll. But that's just me. But as a bare minimum, you really do need to have the vehicle toolkit supplemented with a few basic tools. You see, you don't know what might happen out there on the tracks, and you might be thinking, well, I don't know how to fix anything on my car. But if you've got the tools, maybe somebody else can help you fix your car. So have a toolkit, even if it's basic, it's better than nothing. The next thing is vehicle spares. Now in this vehicle, I have this whole cabinet here and I have CVs and various other componentry that I feel is necessary to keep this vehicle moving on the road. Next thing is make sure you've got a vehicle jack that is suitable for the vehicle, suitable for the weight of the vehicle and suitable for the lift of the vehicle. Sometimes factory jacks don't suit oversized wheels and so on, and you need a larger jack. Whatever it is you take with you, make sure that it's going to work and be helpful to you when you hit those trails. There's two types of communication you need to give consideration to. The first is vehicle-to-vehicle communication. So you want a UHF radio. I have an in-car system, which obviously is great at speed and so on. And then I have a handheld unit, which is great when I'm out spotting somebody on the trails. So that's the first type of communication we want. Second, we want that emergency communication. Now, there's lots of different solutions. This is the GME EPIRB style of communication. Goes up to satellites and tells authorities where you are and they can come rescue you. Nowadays, many modern mobile phones have a satellite feature. This one here, my iPhone, it has that. So in an emergency, I can access the satellites for satellite emergency communication. You can have your satellite phones. They are becoming less and less needed these days, but they're still available and still a good solution for certain people. Now on the 200 series camper, you can see I've got a Starlink dish mounted. Now that's excellent for general communication, but you don't rely on that as an emergency communication. Let's imagine the vehicle catches fire. You can't jump out and grab the Starlink system. You can jump out and grab this, you can jump out and grab that, but the Starlink system is burning with the vehicle. So you need to have other forms of emergency communication aside from a Starlink system. What sort of first aid kit do you need? Do you need a snake bite kit? What fire extinguishers have you got in the vehicle? I always carry something in my vehicle, but for the trip you're doing, do you need more than that? Give it some thought. Quick tip though, where you mount the first aid kit is well worth giving consideration to. You want it to be visible so people can find it if you're the one incapacitated and needing first aid. A common location that makes a lot of sense is up high in the vehicle near a headrest. That way people can look through the window and see the first aid kit. Give it some thought. Where's your first aid kit mounted? A question to ask yourself when you're 3,000 kilometres from home is, do I really need to do the most hardest obstacle in front of me? The reason you want to ask that question is, what happens if you break your four-wheel drive and you're that far from home? It's possibly going to cost you an awful lot of money to get the vehicle repaired or to get the vehicle back home. I'm not saying you don't go and do the obstacle, I'm just saying think about it before you do it. Vehicle recovery. It doesn't matter what sort of four-wheel drive trip you're going on, I think you need to have an absolute basic kit. Now in my case, I would consider the most basic kit going to be a shovel. It is such a versatile and safe recovery tool. It's amazing what you can do with a shovel. The next thing I would have is a set of tread boards. These are the Tread Pros, which I carry with me on my trips. And these traction boards, minimum 2, ideally 4, and they are going to give you a whole heap of traction in mud, sand, and you can use them as a bridging agent. So those two as an absolute bare minimum. But I also like to have a recovery kit with me as well, because this is going to give me a kinetic rope, it's going to give me winch extension rope, it's going to give me soft shackles, recovery pulleys, and other devices that are going to help me if I have to do a recovery. So in my case, pretty much any trip I do, I'm going to take this and this with me. The next piece of recovery equipment I have with me is an air compressor. Now in this vehicle, I've got an air compressor in the back here, hard mounted into the vehicle, but an air compressor of some description and a way of putting air in and out of your tyres so that you can air up and down depending on the situation. You might also consider a tyre repair kit, just a basic kit so you can fix a puncture if you get one on the trails. A quick tip with where you carry your tread boards. Now I always try to carry them on the outside of the vehicle, because if I have to use them in mud, the last thing I ever want to do is touch them, let alone put them back inside my four-wheel drive. So I go to great lengths to work out how I can carry these on the outside of my vehicle. So let's talk about getting your vehicle ready for the trip. Now, if you're just doing a weekend trip, there's probably just basic checks that you're going to do. Check that your fluid levels are correct, tyre pressures are correct, etc. But if you're doing an extended trip, make sure that you take your vehicle to a professional workshop who knows how to prepare vehicles for the type of trip that you're doing, and get that done a couple of weeks before the trip leaves. Because if there's any dramas with that, or they find issues with your vehicle and it takes them some time to get the parts in, you don't want your trip delayed. So 2 or 3 weeks prior to the trip, go and get the vehicle serviced and fully checked out, and make sure you tell the mechanic what you're going to be doing with the vehicle so that they can really cover things off for you. Now you might be thinking to yourself, but I'm not a mechanic, I don't hardly know what I'm looking at under the engine bay or under the vehicle. What I say to people is do what I call the slow look, and do it regularly. So pop the bonnet of your vehicle and just take your time to slowly look over the vehicle, touch things, see what things feel like. Now you might think, Matt, that feels a bit dumb. I don't even know if that's good or not. The thing is, over time of you doing that, you're going to become very familiar what your engine bay looks like, what the underside of your vehicle looks like. And then when something's out of order, you'll go, hang on, that doesn't look right anymore. And you'll be able to go and find somebody who can fix it, or you can try to start managing that situation. And that's why I like to do the slow look. To do with anyone's medical needs. When I lead multi-vehicle, multi-day four-wheel drive trips, I get everybody who's coming on the trip to write out their personal medical records. So any medications they're on, any operations they've had in recent times, and they provide that to me in a sealed envelope. I don't need to know the information. We collect all of those sealed envelopes and we put them into a vehicle's glove box. In an ideal world, we'll have 2 copies and we'll put them in 2 separate glove boxes. Now the idea of this is, if we have an emergency and we have to call the ambulances or medical professionals, we can go and grab that person's envelope and provide it to the professionals, and they will then know what they are dealing with this particular person. Fuel management. How much fuel are you going to need on the trip? This can be a really complicated one to work out because it depends on a number of factors, like, are you driving in sand for long distances? Is it a lot of steep country? Are you towing? All of these factors contribute to how much fuel you're going to carry. In this vehicle, I've got 220 litres of petrol in 2 tanks. At times, I can carry an extra 20 litres in a jerry can out here. That gives this petrol vehicle a range of over 1,000 kilometres if I'm doing highway work at, say, 90 to 100 kilometres an hour. But if I get into the sand, that's probably going to step back to more like 700 to 800 kilometres in heavy sand sort of work. So it all depends, and it's a really hard one to work out how much fuel you need. But here's a tip. Go and do some research and find out Who has already done the trip you're looking at doing in a vehicle similar to yours? Start asking around on the Facebook groups and the websites and see what you can find, and always make sure you've got a little bit extra fuel. I had a situation, I was out in Central Australia with Mrs. Mad Matt. We were towing a caravan and we were going to get fuel at a place called Cameron's Corner. It's the junction of 3 states here in Australia. And we were thinking, beaut, we'll get there. You know what happened? We got there and the staff all had COVID, so the roadhouse was shut down and somebody had been there repairing the fuel bowser and it was all in pieces. There was no way we were getting fuel there. So we had to continue on to a place called Tibooburra, and there was a heap of fuel there. But I tell you what, we drove for an awful long time with the fuel light on, so I was starting to get pretty concerned. Righto, the next one is a huge one. It's loading the 4-wheel drive. It is so easy to overload your 4-wheel drive or incorrectly load your 4-wheel drive or your caravan or your trailer as well. They all fall into the same category. But let me know in the comments down below how you manage this. Do you manage to keep your vehicle underweight or, you know, inside GVM, but you take everything you need with you? One of the biggest traps with this is taking stuff you just don't need to take. So really give due consideration to what it is you put in your 4-wheel drive and whether you really need to take it. When you are loading your 4-wheel drive, always load heavy items down low and between the axles or over the rear axle if at all possible. Try to keep heavy weight off the roof racks. And the reason we want to be aware of where we're putting these heavier weights is to do with our center of gravity. You see, if we put heavy stuff up high, it makes the 4-wheel drive really tippy and unstable in cornering or off-camber environments. With your trailers, make sure that you load them correctly. You want the heavy weight down low and over the trailer axles as much as possible. You don't want heavy weights at the extremities of the van or trailer. Anyway, there's a whole heap more on all of that and I'll let you do your research. But yes, consider how you load your 4-wheel drive. Now, what sort of food and water do you need with you? Well, obviously you need 3 meals a day and maybe some snacks. So we carry a lot of that stuff in our camper here. Okay, we've got 70 litres of water in this tank here, and we've also got another 70 litres of water in the 200 series under the tray. So we've got plenty of water in our scenario. We've got the fridge here. We also have up here a locker, which is where we carry a bunch of emergency food. You see, you want to make sure that you've got things, if something goes wrong and all of a sudden you've got to feed yourself for a few days, you want to have emergency supplies. So have a good think about what food you're going to take, what water you're going to take, and what the emergency supplies need to be. Who have you told back at home where you're going and what your travel destinations and expectations are? Make sure somebody knows what they are, because if something goes wrong for you, at least at some point in time, someone hopefully will come looking for you. Well, there you go. There's a whole heap to think about, isn't there? But you know what? At the end of the day, prior preparation prevents piss poor performance. I'm Mad Matt. Stay safe on the trails.